According to the story Napoleon Hill tells at the opening of his own book, a young reporter was sent in 1908 to interview the wealthiest industrialist in America, Andrew Carnegie, for a magazine piece. The interview was supposed to last 3 hours. It stretched into 3 days. By the end of it, Carnegie issued a challenge. He believed success followed a definite learnable formula, one he had used himself and observed in every wealthy person he knew, and he wanted someone to spend the next 20 years interviewing successful men across the country to extract that formula and hand it to the average person. Hill accepted, and 20 years and roughly 500 interviews later, he published the results. It is a compelling origin story, dramatic, specific, and cited constantly in the decades since. It is also, according to biographers and historians who have gone looking for corroborating evidence, almost entirely unverifiable, and in several of its specific details most likely invented. No solid documentation of the original meeting or the assignment has ever surfaced, and several of the successful men Hill claims extensively interviewed and quotes throughout the book, including Carnegie's own family, left no record confirming the relationship Hill describes. None of this necessarily means the ideas inside the book are worthless. It does mean the book's own framing of itself, as rigorously extracted wisdom from 500 documented interviews commissioned by the richest man in the world, deserves considerably more skepticism than the confident, specific storytelling invites. Hill's actual argument, stripped of its origin myth, is that wealth and achievement follow from a specific, repeatable set of mental disciplines, 13 of them by his count, that can be deliberately cultivated by anyone regardless of starting circumstances. In this video, I want to walk through the core principles he lays out, what each one specifically claims, and then be honest about where the book's packaging and Hill's own biography complicate how much weight to place on it. Stay with me, desire. Hill opens with what he considers the non-negotiable starting point for everything that follows. Not a wish, not a preference, but what he calls a burning desire, a specific, intensely felt want for a particular, clearly defined outcome, backed by a definite plan and a genuine willingness to give up other things to get it. The specific distinction he draws is between wanting something and being obsessed with obtaining it. A casual wish, in his framing, produces casual effort, easily abandoned the first time it becomes inconvenient. A genuinely burning desire, precise enough to be written down as a specific sum, a specific date, and a specific plan for earning it, produces a different order of commitment entirely. One Hill argues most people never actually experience because they never allow themselves to want anything that specifically or that intensely in the first place. He is specific about a practical exercise built around this principle, instructing the reader to write out the exact sum of money desired, the exact date by which it will be acquired, the specific service or product to be given in exchange for it, and a definite plan for achieving it. Then to read this statement aloud twice daily, in a place and manner that allows genuine emotional engagement with it. The specificity, not the general sentiment of wanting to be wealthy, is what Hill treats as doing the actual psychological work. Faith and autosuggestion. Hill pairs desire with what he calls faith, a state of unwavering belief that the desired outcome will actually be achieved, cultivated deliberately through repetition rather than arrived at through evidence. His specific technique for building this state is autosuggestion, repeating a written statement of your goal aloud, with emotion multiple times a day, on the theory that repeated, emotionally charged self-talk gradually reprograms the subconscious mind to work toward the stated goal automatically, even outside conscious awareness. The specific mechanism he proposes is that the subconscious mind does not distinguish between a vividly imagined outcome and an actually experienced one, and that repeated, emotionally intense autosuggestion effectively convinces this part of the mind the goal is already underway, which in turn shapes behavior, attention, and even the recognition of relevant opportunities in ways a person consciously pursuing the same goal, without this repetition, would miss. Hill is careful to note that faith in his usage is not passive hoping. He describes it as an active state that has to be deliberately induced and maintained through the repetition itself, arguing that belief untethered from repeated specific reinforcement tends to fade quickly under the weight of ordinary discouragement, while belief maintained through consistent daily repetition becomes considerably more resistant to the setbacks that would otherwise erode it. Specialized knowledge and imagination. Hill draws a specific distinction between general knowledge, widely available and in his view largely worthless on its own, and specialized knowledge organized and directed toward a specific goal, which he considers genuinely valuable only once applied through a definite plan. Simply accumulating information, he argues, has never made anyone wealthy. Organizing specific, relevant knowledge into an actionable plan is the step most people skip. He pairs this with imagination, which he treats not as idle daydreaming, but as the specific mental faculty responsible for combining existing ideas into new forms, a process he considers essential to translating a desire into a workable plan in the first place. Hill's argument is that most valuable ideas are not entirely original creations, but new combinations of existing elements, and that deliberately exercising imagination, treating it as a skill to be developed rather than a fixed trait some people simply have, is a specific practical step in his overall system rather than a vague inspirational aside. Organized planning and the mastermind. Hill argues that desire and faith alone accomplish nothing without translation into a specific, organized plan of action, and that the plan itself should be built, whenever possible, in cooperation with others rather than in isolation. He calls this collaborative structure the mastermind principle, a group of people working in harmony toward a common definite purpose, which he argues generates a form of combined intelligence and energy genuinely greater than the simple sum of the individuals involved. The specific claim is not merely that collaboration is useful in a general sense, which is uncontroversial, but that a mastermind group operating with genuine harmony produces something closer to a distinct, emergent capability, drawing on the specific knowledge, contacts, and perspective of each member in ways no individual could access alone. Hill treats the deliberate formation of such a group, chosen carefully and maintained with real coordination, as a specific practical requirement of the system rather than an optional nicety. He also addresses the practical mechanics of organized planning directly, arguing that a plan which fails should be treated as a failed plan rather than a failed goal, replaced immediately with a revised approach rather than abandoned along with the underlying desire itself. This distinction between the goal and the specific method currently being used to reach it is one Hill returns to repeatedly, treating premature abandonment of the goal, rather than simple revision of the method, as one of the more common and avoidable causes of failure among the people he claims to have studied. Persistence and decision. Hill devotes considerable attention to persistence, which he treats as the specific quality most responsible for the difference between people who eventually achieve a burning desire and people who abandon it partway through. He is specific that persistence is not simply stubbornness or refusal to change course. It is the sustained, disciplined continuation of effort toward a clearly defined goal, particularly through the periods of difficulty and apparent failure that, in his account, appear immediately before most major breakthroughs. He pairs this with a specific observation about decisiveness, claiming based on his interviews that successful individuals reach decisions quickly and change them slowly, while people who never achieve significant success tend to reach decisions slowly, if at all, and change them quickly under the slightest pressure or criticism. Whether or not this specific correlation holds up as a rigorous, testable finding, Hill's underlying point, that indecision itself has a real cost, separate from whichever specific choice is eventually made, is one of the more practically grounded claims in the book. He connects persistence directly to the earlier principle of desire, arguing the two are inseparable in practice. A desire that is genuinely specific and emotionally intense, in his account, naturally produces persistence as a byproduct. while persistence attempted in the absence of a clearly defined desire tends to collapse quickly, because there is no sufficiently compelling reason underneath it to sustain effort once the initial motivation fades. The subconscious mind and the sixth sense. Hill closes his framework with two more speculative principles. The subconscious mind in his account functions as a kind of intermediary that translates thoughts, particularly those repeated with strong emotion, into physical reality, a claim he presents with more confidence than any established psychological or physical mechanism actually supports. The sixth sense, the final and most speculative principle, describes what Hill calls a form of creative intuition or access to what he terms infinite intelligence, available specifically to those who have developed the previous 12 principles thoroughly. These closing sections mark the clearest departure from the more practically grounded material earlier in the book, moving into language considerably closer to metaphysics than psychology, and readers approaching the book primarily for practical, testable advice on goal setting and persistence generally find these final chapters the least useful and the hardest to evaluate on any concrete basis. Now let us be honest about this book. The specific, actionable core of Hill's system, clearly defined goals, deliberate cultivation of belief and persistence, organized planning, and genuine collaboration through something resembling a mastermind group, holds up reasonably well against later, more rigorously tested research on goal setting and motivation. Even though Hill himself offers little in the way of verifiable evidence for any specific claim beyond his own assertion and his disputed collection of interviews. The larger problem is the book's packaging. Independent biographical research into Hill's own life has found considerable evidence that he significantly embellished or fabricated large portions of his personal history, including claims of a law degree, service as an advisor to sitting American presidents, and the specific extent and nature of his relationship with Carnegie and the other wealthy men he claims to have studied so extensively. Several of the successful individuals named throughout the book, when later checked against historical record, show no documented connection to Hill at all, raising serious questions about how much of the book's supposed empirical foundation, 500 interviews systematically conducted over 20 years, actually occurred as described. This does not mean every specific claim in the book is false, but it does mean the book should be read as a work of persuasive, often genuinely insightful philosophy dressed in the specific language of empirical research, rather than as the rigorously documented study it presents itself as. The 13 principles, evaluated on their own practical merits rather than on the credibility of their supposed origin, range from genuinely useful, the emphasis on specificity, persistence, and organized planning, to considerably more speculative, the metaphysical claims about thought vibration and infinite intelligence in the closing chapters. It is also worth noting that the book was written and published during the Great Depression, a period defined by widespread scarcity and hardship, and its promise that anyone, regardless of circumstance, could achieve wealth through disciplined thought and effort alone landed with particular resonance precisely because it offered a sense of agency to readers living through conditions largely outside their control. That historical context helps explain the book's enormous, lasting popularity, though it does not, on its own, resolve the separate question of how reliably the underlying formula actually performs across the full range of circumstances readers bring to it. So what do you actually take from this? The most durable idea, independent of the book's contested origin story, is the distinction between a vague wish and a specific, written, emotionally charged desire attached to a real plan. This distinction shows up, in less mystical language, throughout considerably more rigorously researched work on goal setting produced decades after Hill's book, suggesting the core observation survives even where its original packaging does not. The second useful idea is treating indecision itself as a real cost, separate from whichever option is eventually chosen. A person who takes considerably longer to decide is not thereby making a better decision. They are often simply accumulating the cost of delay without any corresponding improvement in the choice itself. The third thing is simply this. Whatever the true, unverifiable history behind this book's claimed research, the underlying wager it makes, that clarity of desire and disciplined persistence toward it outperform vague hope and scattered effort, has been tested independently many times over by researchers with no interest in selling a dramatic origin story, and has held up considerably better than the origin story itself. Thanks for watching all the way through. Whether or not Carnegie ever actually gave that challenge, the challenge itself was never really the point. What people actually did with clearly defined desire and real persistence was